Hello, everybody, and welcome to Answers for May 12th, 2020. I'm Kevin Daly. On today's edition of Answers, there will be a school update. There will also be a school at home update by Audra Talbot. My guest this week is Lori Singer, Director of Special Services for the Farmington Public Schools. And as always, there will be time for Q&A with participants. So get ready to tap that Q&A button. We want to hear from you, and don't wait until the end. If you think of a question, send it to us now. Answers is brought to you by PATH, Parent to Parent, Family Voices of Connecticut, which is a nonprofit organization that has served Connecticut families of children with special needs for 30 years. PATH has many programs and services that they offer, and they all are free to the families that we serve. You see in front of you a partial list of PATH programs and services. I just wanted to quickly spotlight one of them. It's called the Listener Program. PATH can provide a match for parents who need a mentor, who are looking for a veteran parent who's been through what they're going through and survived. PATH can match parents like that. It's called our Listener Program. Listeners provide emotional support and support just from the know-how they gained by being the parents who they are. Not legal advice, not healthcare advice, but practical advice, like where to find a barber, where to find a dentist. If you've ever had a hard time finding someone like that, you know what I mean. Listeners are trained by PATH, and we train them on an ongoing basis. There is an ongoing need for listeners, and PATH does training regularly. I believe the next training session for listeners is in June. So if you would like a listener, or if you're that veteran parent and you'd like to give a little bit back, please contact Sherry Romblad at PATH at the email address that you see in front of you. If you have any questions about this webinar, please send them to me directly, Kevin Daly, at my email address, which is right in front of you. For more information about PATH, visit our website and also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. And now you can watch us on YouTube, where we ask you to like and subscribe. And here's the fine print, folks. This webinar is not intended to be legal advice or healthcare advice. This is a webinar about looking for answers at a time when there are many more questions than answers. And this webinar and all attached materials are the sole property of PATH and are not to be used for any other purpose without the express written permission of PATH. Here's the school update for May 12th. Currently, schools in 48 states are closed for the rest of the academic year, or the recommendation has been to close. The two states who are holding out are Wyoming and Montana. In Wyoming, schools are closed until May. There's no word on whether they will stay closed. And in Montana, school districts get to decide if they open or close. It's not a decision that's made by the government. And for that reason, last week in Willow Creek, Montana, a small town, population 210, school opened at the Willow Creek Public School. They opened on Thursday, and it's going to be for the last 3 weeks of school. Now, Willow Creek is in Gatlin County. Huge county. It's half the size of Connecticut. This county has 16 school districts within its limits, and Willow Creek was the first one to open. 3 more school districts are expected to open before the end of the school year, and the rest of the school districts, they're staying closed for the rest of the academic year. Here you see the principal at Willow Creek taking temperatures of students as they come into the school. As the students approach the school, while they're in the school, and when they leave, they wear masks. And teachers are assigned a 6-foot pool noodle to help enforce social distancing. I think that's really original. Meanwhile, in other parts of the world, schools are opening as well. Here's a picture that was taken last week at a school in Vietnam. And you see students, they're all wearing masks. This is a school in China where students have their temperature checked in the classroom. Another school in China where the hallway has been partitioned into two sides with markings on the floor to show pedestrians which direction to go in. This is all designed to minimize social contact. In the same school in China, the video monitors actually monitor the students' temperatures, which I think is really cool. And here in Spain, this group of students is practicing what just may be the new mantra for public education. Single file, stay to the right, limit social contact. What about Connecticut? What about our state? What's it going to be like when our schools open up? Well, right now there are more questions than answers, but it is possible to take a few educated guesses. One way to make educated guesses is to consider the governor's Reopen Connecticut plan, which calls for some businesses to open on May 20th. As part of this plan, there are some very strict rules. Rules for offices include social distancing and wearing masks or cloth face covers. I can see how that could easily translate into what happens in schools when they open. Offices need to maintain 50% of their capacity at all times. And for that reason, it's recommended that businesses spread out work schedules. So if, for example, there's a single shift with 100 workers, take it and break it in half. Make it 2 shifts at different times with 50 workers on one, 50 on the other, 50-50. Strict cleaning and disinfecting, that's called for by offices. You can bet that's going to happen in public schools. And where possible, businesses are ordered to close or restrict break rooms and cafeterias, which is interesting. Have you ever known a public school not to have a cafeteria? The whole idea behind the rules for offices in the plan is to maintain social distancing and to keep people apart so they don't infect each other. Unfortunately, Connecticut schools weren't designed that way. In fact, as stated by the Commissioner of Education, Dr. Miguel Cardona, in Sunday's Hartford Courant, our schools weren't outfitted for this. If anything, they have been the opposite. They encourage community learning, group learning, because we know that's how students learn best. Unfortunately, that's going to change. Yesterday, there was a very interesting Zoom presentation by the advisory group that advises the governor on Reopen Connecticut. Dr. Cardona was there, along with people who are stakeholders in education in Connecticut, K through 12, higher education, teacher unions. Notably, no one was there representing students with disabilities. Some of the recommendations that come out of the advisory group that were shared on Monday are kind of like a rough roadmap to what we can expect when schools reopen. We can expect smaller classes, fewer students on a school bus, and classrooms will need to be modified so students are physically separated. There's a need to be flexible, a need to change plans when needed. This is a recommendation by the advisory group because, folks, there is a chance the virus may hit us with a second wave this fall. If that happens, schools that reopened just might close down again. Distance learning may come back. It is a reality. It's up to the pandemic, not to us. More recommendations from the advisory group. Money will be needed to limit exposure to the virus. You know, these precautions, they don't pay for themselves. And that money is way too much for school districts to handle on their own. The advisory group says that money will need to come from state and federal sources if it's going to happen. Another recommendation from the advisory group is that students will need to be tested academically when they return to measure their performance and see just how much they have regressed. Another recommendation, and I agree with this entirely, our children have been through a traumatic experience through all this. The kids are bringing all that trauma back with them into school when the schools reopen. I learned a couple of new things that I didn't know while looking at this Zoom webcast. One of them was pretty cool. The other one, not so cool. I'll start with the one that's not so cool. Connecticut's birth to three system. During the presentation, Beth Bai, whose agency oversees birth to three, reported that referrals to birth to three have plummeted since the pandemic started. Fewer children are going into birth to three. That means that children who need to go into birth to three aren't going in. Fewer children will get the benefits of birth to three, and when they're a little older, when they should be transferred to their school district with a recommendation from birth to three for early childhood services, well, how can that happen if they're not in birth to three? So this is something that could easily affect access to early childhood services for young children, and that is not good. Beth Bai reminded us, and I'm going to pass this on, if you know anyone who could use the services of birth to three, ask them to call 211 info line and get a referral. The other thing I learned that is kind of neat is that summer camps are going to be allowed to open. They're going to be allowed to open on June 29th, but with some very strict rules. Typically, no more than 10 children in a group, and the entire program can't have more than 30 children. Now, there are some big summer camps out there, and it is possible for a camp that has a greater capacity to apply for a permit to take in more campers. And also a recommendation of the advisory group was that school districts that run summer camps, they should run them this summer too. So how does this all affect special education students? Well, in a lot of ways. Of course, how it affects your individual special education student, that will vary because every special ed student is different. But in my time working with young people with disabilities who are in special education, I've seen that a lot of them have trouble in these three areas: transitions, social integration, and emotional regulation. These are going to be challenges that schools are going to have to address when the kids come back. It's going to be part of their reality. Transitions. You know, children in special education sometimes struggle with transitions. Sometimes they withdraw, sometimes they're non-compliant, sometimes they're even defiant because transitions are difficult for them. I'm talking about transitions like, transitioning from one classroom to another, making a transition from one school to another. Sometimes it's a transition like a teacher's directive to put away that game and take out your math book and turn it to page 80. Transitions can be very difficult for special education students. And you can be sure that when schools open, they're going to be different, and there's going to be a transition period for students. There's so many new rules, so many new procedures to follow. That in itself is going to set off quite a few special education students. And by social integration, I mean fitting in with the other kids. It's not an easy task to accomplish when you're different. And for many of our kids, social contact can really be stressful. With fewer students in a classroom, will it be easier to integrate socially, or will it stunt the growth of skills that are needed to develop social integration? I don't know. Will there be fewer opportunities for our children to practice social skills now that social distancing is part of the norm? And a big part of social integration is understanding the emotions of other people. This is something that comes intuitively to most children, but for other children, it's something that needs to be taught. And that's why we have things like this, a tool that a teacher would use in order to show someone, a student, to associate facial expressions with certain emotions. These are used almost universally. However, folks, when school resumes, everyone is going to be wearing masks. It's very difficult to judge the emotion of someone wearing a mask. So this is a complication, again, that will be facing the school people. And what about emotional regulation? Emotional regulation for a lot of our kids is a huge problem. In the best of times, it can be a huge problem. And looking at these changes and the new environment, it's safe to expect that emotional regulation will become a difficult area for a lot of kids. I agree with the advisories group opinion that our kids have gone through a traumatic experience just from the way that schools closed suddenly, the switch to distance learning, spending so much time under lockdown, and of course the fear and grief of possibly losing loved ones or actually losing loved ones. It's been traumatic. And for special education students who have difficulty with their emotional regulation, it's even more traumatic. The schools need to plan for our students' physical safety, but it's also important for them to plan for our children's emotional health. And in my opinion, it's just as important. And one more thing. We're still waiting for Governor Lamont to give us guidance on summer school in Connecticut schools. We're expecting it before the end of the month, so we don't have that yet. And one more thing. I would like to remind you of a promise that was made to us by the U.S. Department of Education, the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services. This is the promise, and it's made to the parents of special education students. When schools resume normal operations, IEP teams, in Connecticut, PPT teams, these teams must make a determination of just how far our children have regressed because all of this, and if necessary, compensatory services need to be provided. This is a promise to the parents of special education students and the special education students themselves. We expect that promise to be kept. On the next edition of Answers on May 19th, my special guest will be Brian Klimkowitz, Bureau Chief of the Bureau of Special Education at the Connecticut State Department of Education. In a minute, I will have my interview with Lori Singer live. She is the Director of Special Services for the Farmington Public Schools. But first, the School at Home update with Audra Talbot. Audra has been going around and interviewing people who are involved in distance learning, parents, families. This week, Audra is taking a look at another person who's involved in distance learning. This time it's a teacher. Let's listen into their conversation.
Hi, and welcome to Answers from Past Parent to Parent Family Voices. My name is Audra Talbot, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar tonight. I get the privilege of interviewing a special education teacher. She's a teacher for 17 years here in the state of Connecticut. Her name is Allison, and she teaches at a special education school here in our state. So Allison, welcome. Thank you for joining me tonight.
Thank you for having me, Audra. It's nice to be here.
Thank you. So, distance learning. I have a couple questions for you on this.
Sure.
So it was kind of a crash course in technology and how to deliver instruction over the internet to your students. And so the school that you work at is the majority of them special education students.
Yes, yes, they are. All of them are.
Okay, so the access to the delivery of services can be limited by this, is that correct?
What I found is one of the biggest challenges is I'm very hands-on, very multi-sensory. I integrate my lessons across the curriculum, and I take advantage of the entire school to meet my students' needs, where they're at, and bring them to where I hope that they where I want them to be. And I take advantage of the whole school, whether I have to take it to the gym and do a math lesson in the gym, whether I take it to the OT room, whether I make a mime, whether I take them outside and do math outside. The computer limits that. You can't get very multi-sensory. Well, I thought you couldn't get very multi-sensory through the computer. I thought you couldn't get hands-on through the computer. And I'm very new to this world of Google Meet and Zoom. And that's been, I don't even want to say a challenge. It posed a challenge, but I'm learning. I'm learning.
I like how you said that. Yeah, it's the positive part of it. We have to try to stay positive about it, right? Yeah.
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
you already, Allison. So my first question to you is, what is your school doing to keep learning going for its students?
When we, as a school, as they decided, I think it was March 13th, that we will not be returning to school on, I think it was the 16th. We sent home, excuse me?
I don't mean to interrupt you. It was Friday the 13th. I'm just saying.
Friday the 13th, yes. We sent home packets. We put up packets covering all of PT, OT, speech, math, language, everything. We sent home. We put packages together for every one of our students in our school. And it was a team effort. All of my teachers and myself, we put that together. Our PT, our OT, our speech, put all these lessons together. And we sent home packets thinking that it would be for 2 weeks. And then I believe it was, as a school, the school got up and running on Google Classroom, I think by March 26th or 27th. I don't know if that was the exact date, but it was like about a week. And we were doing lessons, one-to-one Meet lessons with each of our students through Zoom or through Google Meet. And we all had to instantly learn how to do all of this. Create a classroom, learn. I've never been on Meet before. I think I've been on Zoom, but somebody else was doing it for me, and I was just an attendee. But we had to learn that like within a week. We had to post lessons on the classroom. We had to, so our school is doing that for every one of our students. And they've gotten, subscriptions to IXL, reading programs, all different types of things to meet each of our students' needs, which is pretty impressive, I think.
I have to tell you, I literally got, and I don't mean to be overly dramatic, but I literally got the chills, because just hearing that you had to do so much as a school, but also how to individualize that for each one of your students. I'm finding as we're going about, and I'm hearing a lot of stories, a lot of that wasn't happening. And kids were just given packets, and it was just like a generic packet. It's like, hey, kid, go for it. This is your lesson. And it's just refreshing to hear that was so individualized for each child.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for answering that. I think you kind of answered the next question, right? How you're doing it personally, but what are you doing to keep the learning going for your own students? Like each day that you go through, what are you personally doing to help?
I know that I personally see most of my students 1 to 2 times, and then my school, each student I think is seen a minimum of 4 times. a day live, but they have access to a teacher all day. So through emails and, texts and phone conversations. And so it's, it's getting, I don't want to say that it was, I keep on saying this word. I'm adapting. I'm flexible. I have that flexible thinking that I'm going to make it to work. And I think one of the questions, and you'll get to it, I know, but what do I miss? It's also that proximity that when we're with a student, that proximity. And I remember when I was taking classes to get my master's, they were saying proximity means so much. We don't have that ability to have that proximity through the computer. So I find myself putting my face up to the computer to get into, to have that same impact as my body close to a student. And it's whole body teaching too.
So you were kind of getting into our next question. I think just so organically, and it was, what's your typical school day look like? You said you have a minimum of 4, not you personally, but you and the school in conjunction with each other, SLPs and OTs, and other teachers, of course, meeting with children and parents throughout the day. Is that what your typical school day looks like?
I usually, because I had a commute before, so I'm adjusting to waking up at 5:30 in the morning. And what do I do from 5:30 in the morning until 8? So I plan my lessons, and then from 8 o'clock until 3 o'clock, I'm back-to-back sessions with my half-hour sessions through Zoom. Meet mostly. I use mostly Meet because that's what I feel comfortable with. Right. I think it was just because that's what I learned, and when we're in the midst of it, I didn't feel comfortable changing over to Zoom because I learned Meet, and that's what I did. So from 8:30 to 3 o'clock, I have one-to-one Meet sessions. Then I have to post. I post in the classroom all of the students' work, but I also create lessons with the help of the other teachers. We put lessons, extra lessons on for music, for videos, on virtual tours, following the themes that we're following for that week, social pragmatic lessons.
You were saying something about how you stay in touch with your parents, how you do that during the day. Like you check in with the parents during the day for one of those sessions, or several of those sessions. I don't know how you do it. That's an important thing, I think, is the big part of this, because a lot of the parents that have kids in special education will be watching this webinar. And so I think it's important for them to know that if they're not getting that interaction with their school as much as they'd like, it is happening. It could happen, and you should be asking for it. So do you have anything that you like to add to that? Like, how many times on an average do you talk to a parent outside of the Google Classroom?
Well, just even when we're not in distant learning, all of my parents, and I'm trying to think back, even when I was, ever since going back to beginning teaching, all my parents have always had my personal email, my phone number, and they have, they know that they can call me with questions. I want that open line of communication. I've always had that open line of communication. If you want to call me, at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock at night, I want them to know that it's okay on the weekends, because that's how they develop that respect and that trust that I have their child's best interest at heart. And I truly, honestly, sincerely do. And I think that that's how I can show them that I want them to be able to call me and not feel bad if they do. So whether it's email, text, phone conversation, Zoom, meetup. I do meet with every one of I'm part of a team, and I oversee that team of the group of kids in my school. So I personally meet with each one of my parents, either during the school day or after school. I meet from like 3 or 4 o'clock. I chunk out that, and I set up schedules where I'm meeting with the parents 1 day a week. So we have that time, that it's not a teaching time, it's a time to parent-teacher interaction, to offer that support on how to make this experience as successful as we possibly can make it together. And then throughout the day, if the teachers need me, or if the other teachers need me, we're constantly in. I think when this first began, because I'm used to seeing them teach at our school, so then I would enter their Zoom or meetup sessions with them to just build that trust with the parents, because the parents knew me. And I mean, they knew the other students, but they knew me more. So I was very adamant about making the parents trust the other teachers with my team. So go on, sorry.
No, it's okay. You brought up the word trust, and when you were describing all the ways parents can contact you through email, through phone, through text messaging, which is amazing, by the way. And you're making yourself accessible to them, especially now when you know that the frustration and the emotions and kind of their mental well-being is on the table as well. I think all of ours is, but as a parent myself, my mental well-being is very important because it filters down to my kids. But I love that you're so accessible to your families. And I think that you nailed it when you said trust, because that's the first word I thought of, because in my profession as a special education advocate, that's one of the things I promote with school teams, to ask for team meetings, because you're building trust. And this is something that parents truly need to have with the team. So
yes.
Thank you for saying that. I think that's really important.
Yeah. I have a very strong team in the school where they're all, they're available. If I say, oh no, I can't get this to work, well, try this. In fact, it was somebody in the school mentioned, well, I think you need a new internet service. And I'm like, my internet is fine. I've had it for 13 years. And
wow.
Well, but, and I am trying to, I do literally have 2 laptops, 2 iPads, a Chromebook, and my cell phone. And I have to, sometimes I'm on all of them to make the lesson.
I read an article a couple of weeks ago about how this is impacting teachers, specifically special education teachers, that have devoted their lives, truly devoted their lives to teaching children with disabilities. And they're doing it one way, and then all of a sudden they can't access their kids. So, how is that affecting you, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh, no, not at all. I think outside of the box, and I want to succeed. And if I succeed, my students are successful. And I try all different things until I find that they're engaging in lessons, until they're meeting their objectives. And I have to say, I think the technology part, because I don't want to say that I'm old, but I'm not in the generation of where I have the computers being, I didn't know what Google Classroom was. I didn't know that you can, turn the camera a certain way and make it face the board. I had one of my team members do a lesson, and I was like, oh, I was flipping my camera, but we're learning through each other. And I think that was a little bit frustrating. I don't even want to say frustrating, because I try to be positive. It was something that I didn't know how to do. So I am constantly learning, even after teaching for 17 years. I'm learning something different. And I think that we have to continuously be open to learning. You think you've been teaching for 17 years, you know everything. But I'm learning every single day, which is exciting. But I think it's that switching to, okay, you've been a teacher for 17 years, but you're still learning. Teaching, we think that we've learned everything. And I think it's nice to know that I'm continuing to learn. I continue to learn every day, and not just from my team members, from my parents and my students. And that's the silver lining. I mean, we're like a family. Like, you know, we're all learning from each other, with each other, throughout this whole thing. And it is a positive, and it's nice to know that we're in this together.
You just gave me the chills. You literally just gave. I think that you know, I think that's, you nailed it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And happy teacher. It was last week. I get it. I'm a week late, but happy Teacher Appreciation Week.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you guys for what you do.
So that's it tonight. I'd like to thank Allison, our special education teacher, for giving us her intuition and her knowledge about everything that's happening out there in the world during this crisis that we're in. And that's really what I believe it is. It's a crisis, but we're getting through it. And so I want to say thank you, because you really inspire. And that's it for tonight. Thank you for joining us for Past Answers, and hope to see you next week. This is Audrey Talbot. Have a good one.
Okay, and there we are. Although it looks like I'm not showing up yet, I probably will in a second. So Audra, I get the impression from Allison that she went on a very steep learning curve when the school closed.
Yeah, that's the same impression I had as well. When she explained to me, which wasn't actually in our interview, but she explained to me when we first spoke about what she did personally as a special ed teacher to her house in order to get this up and running. I mean, she even upgraded her internet in order to get this done so she could access her students. She's up at night late. She's worried about her kids. And it's just, I think it's just, it's moving. It stinks, but it's moving. You know, that our teachers out there and our related service professionals as well, you know, speech paths, OTs, everyone who's in our world in special education, they're worried about our kids. And so they're all in this. And I think, you know, I always like to say our silver linings at the end of my mommy school segment. That's, for me, that's a silver lining, because these people care about my kids. And it's human. And we're all struggling in certain ways. Like I go through the day sometimes, I just sit in the chair after school and I'm just like, wow, how did I survive that? And then you get up in the morning and you look in the mirror and you're like, okay, let's do it. And you just keep going. You just keep going. And so Allison really inspires me. And that's why I really wanted to interview her.
Well, she certainly was a good choice.
Yeah, thanks. There you are, Kevin.
Yeah, I'm back. Okay, well, Audra, thank you. Thank you for your contribution. I do appreciate it. And up next is my interview with Lori Singer, Director of Special Services for the Farmington Public Schools. Okay, Lori, it's good to see you. Welcome to Answers.
There. Hi,
Okay.
Kevin. Here I am. Thanks so much for having me this evening. I really appreciate the invitation.